Hello and welcome to another episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast, the podcast where we delve back in time into different sports topics. Today we've kind of gone, a little different tact, I guess. We're going to compare the three coaches the Steelers have had since 1969. So if you're a big like Walt Kiesling or Louis D'Amelio or who's the guy who cut everybody? Was that Buddy Parker?
Buddy Parker, yeah.
Yeah, if you're any of the, I'm sorry, they're just not going to be in this conversation. I think I have Buddy Parker just for comparison, these three guys to him, but yeah, nobody else really. Sorry, those guys didn't have any success at all. So we're just going to compare, obviously, Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin, and I'm sure me and Tim will have some lively discussion. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host Tim Hannon.
And, hi, everybody. We're gonna have... Steve, I'm disappointed that you did not include Johnny Blood McNally in the conversation either. Was he the guy that didn't show up for the game?
No, he was the one that snuck out of his hotel room. They had to put him on the fourth floor, and maybe was he the one that went to the Rose Bowl instead of the game in West Virginia?
Right.
Like, whoops.
And they're like, the Steelers are playing right now, and he was like, oh,
no, maybe. So yeah, good for Johnny Blood, but we're going to talk about coaches that actually know when their team is playing and actually show up and coach them. So that would include, obviously, the three of the last 30 years. So I guess we'll start. I'm just kind of how laid out is we'll give some background on each of the coaches and kind of some their accomplishments, which, it's pretty impressive for most of them, quite honestly. So, and after that, at the end, we'll compare all three to each other and then probably do some historical comparison too. So, fun times. Are you ready, Tim? Are you ready to delve in here?
Giddy up.
Woo. So the first up is obviously one Chuck Noll. Chuck Noll was from Cleveland. He's actually born, and I do believe he played high school football in Cleveland. He played for Paul Brown, and he won an NFL championship as an assistant coach. He was also an assistant coach under Don Shula with the Baltimore Colts, and he coached in Super Bowl III for the Colts in that famous upset loss to Joe Namath and the Jets. So maybe, it's kind of weird that he got hired after probably one of the more bigger embarrassing upsets of NFL history. But Dan Rooney, I in his wisdom looked past that. He was hired in 1969 after meeting with the chief, Art Rooney Sr., and Dan Rooney at the Roosevelt Hotel. If you know the Roosevelt Hotel, I can't believe people actually had classy meetings down there. I always thought that place was kind of sleazy, but I guess it's a good place to hire a football coach back in 1969. They get into Coach Noll's, Chuck Noll's coaching style or his personality. I would say he was not a player's coach. Just on a personal thing, he liked classical music, and he actually liked it so much he actually conducted the Pittsburgh Symphony one time, believe it or not. He was a conservative game caller, and overall he was very philosophical and intelligent, but he was a very astute football coach, especially in his prime years in the 70s and with the draft. Any reactions to any disagreements with any of that, Tim, so far?
No, that's about right. I do remember him conducting the symphony. I remember that was kind of one of his passions, and I think that was a real thrill for him to be able to do that. It fit his personality too, conducting the symphony. more so than, I
Yeah,
don't
and
know,
there's like
being on stage with like the
coaching.
Rolling Stones or something, right? Like it just fit
Yeah,
his
yeah.
personality.
Yeah, and like there's just weird little stories like about that. I remember Rocky Blyer saying one time like he walked past like his room and like I guess at St. Vincent's before training camp and like picked up a ukulele and tuned it and like played a song and then like gave him it back and I was like, "Oh, okay, see ya practice, Rock." It's like so Chuck Dole was kind of like I don't know, he just like a little walk to his own beat there a little bit, little quirky. Um, Also, we'll include some media and fan reaction. I had a lot of I could not find much. I guess in 1969 because there was no internet and like I mean I couldn't find any letters to the editor. I guess or if anyone even would have cared to write a letter to the editor about the Steelers hiring a football coach because like I guess this kind of goes back to like historical perspective. 1969 is how long is it? That's 50 some years almost now, right? Or yeah, it's so I guess the culture was so much different. It wasn't like now, somebody's just not going to jump on the internet and go click, 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 click. You actually had to sit down and write a letter to the editor, and hopefully somebody had wrote an art and they would publish it. So, and I guess what you would your two options would have been the Pittsburgh Post Gazette or the Pittsburgh Press. So I don't know. It's just not a lot of like. It was hard to gauge fan reaction to this, but I did find some like quotes, but they're mainly for like they're more after the fact. But some of these you might have heard before. The first one was by Andy Russell. Um, he was he shared this I guess quote by Chuck Noll when Chuck Noll first took over. Look, I've been watching the game film since I took the job, and I can tell you guys that the reasons you've been losing is not because of your attitude or your psyche or any of that stuff. The problem is you're just not good enough. And you can't run fast enough. You can't jump high enough. You're not quick enough. Your techniques are just abysmal. And I'm probably going to have to get rid of most of you. And we're going to move on. And, 5 of us made it from that room to our first Super Bowl following the 74 season. And that was Andy Russell. So I think his first year, he went 1-13.
13.
I
Yeah.
do believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty
So
hardcore telling all the guys I'm gonna probably cut most of you. But I mean, he wasn't there to win friends or, like you said, he certainly wasn't a player's coach and he wasn't there to. He was there to win and turn the franchise around. That was a miserable franchise. And to your point about reaction, I would imagine that like you said, there wasn't huge interest like there would be today because the Steelers were, they had a following, but they weren't the Steelers that they became. And then two, I would just imagine that the reaction was probably like, oh, okay, another coach, you know, like it's not going to
well,
change anything.
yeah, especially they just hired that other guy 2 years ago from the Packers. So I mean, like you said, I mean, how many coaches was that? In the first from 1933 to 1969, I mean, what they probably went through like 20 some coaches. I mean, I'm being conservative there, so it is. He's building the. You can tell like from this quote, his idea from the beginning was to build a franchise, and he realized he basically had to start from the ground up. So another person that reacted, and he shows up a couple times throughout this. He's going to show up in this podcast, and he's good for a quote, and he'll definitely stir some conversation here. It would be one Terry Bradshaw. So the first 10 to 15 years after my retirement, I was pissed. I'm not going to lie to you, Bradshaw said. He is no longer with us on his earth, and there are so many wonderful things that Chuck did for me, but he did not know how to handle me. That was Terry Bradshaw and his relationship with Chuck Noll. So, for some reason, Terry Bradshaw really never got along with Chuck Noll. I don't know. Like, I was thinking about this earlier. Like, I don't know what Terry Bradshaw expected out of that relationship, but we'll kind of contrast that to here's what Tony Dungy said about him. So it kind of like gives a nice contrast to Terry Bradshaw's feeling about Chuck Noll. The first meeting we ever had, I was a rookie and I had my notebook out. They had won 2 Super Bowls already, so I'm expecting Chuck to tell us what we need to do to make the team. Instead, he says, "Gentlemen, welcome to the NFL. You are now being paid to play football is your profession, but I can tell you it is not your life. You can't let it be. Part of my job is helping you to find your life's work." And that is the kind of thing that stuck with me about Chuck. And that was, so I don't know, maybe Coach Noll as he went kind of evolved, because that's so different than what Andy Russell said, but I guess that's a difference. For when he got there wasn't a culture of winning and nothing had been established. Now they're 2 Super Bowls in and won all these games and, kind of established it. So it's definitely, he kind of obviously, he obviously adjusted his kind of management of the team at that point, I would say. So we'll start with the negatives about Chuck Noll. The 1-13 rookie season that I mentioned, the whole decade of the 1980s. It wasn't good for Miami Vice and Eddie Murphy, but Chuck Noll not so much. Drafting Gabe Rivera over Dan Marino. I put the Franco Who comment. That was kind of uncalled for. I always thought that was, you could have just said, "I wish Franco the best in Seattle. We just, it was time for us to move on. We're going to move on with Walter Abercrombie. I'm sure he's going to make the Hall of Fame next, whoever the running back was at the time." But his relationship with Terry Bradshaw, but I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what Terry Bradshaw wanted out of that relationship. And another thing was Noll could never find another Terry Bradshaw. He could never really replace Terry Bradshaw. But, I mean, I'm sure, Bill Belichick's going to find out how easy it is to replace Tom Brady here and, in the next couple of years. So, also what happened as it got into the 90s, the late 80s and 90s, he wasn't able to relate to the newer generation of players. Like I picked Tim Worley or Eric Green. He didn't seem to be able to relate to those guys anymore. He didn't want to be, he liked to build through the draft, so he didn't want to adapt to free agency. And he did lose 3 AFC championship games. So now on to the positives. Noll's win total ranks him 8th all time behind coaches like Tom Landry, Andy Reid, Marty Schottenheimer, and Bill Belichick, Curly Lambeau. He's just ahead of Dan Reeves by 3 wins. And it's hard to believe that, like, Marty Schottenheimer has more wins than Chuck Noll. I mean, that's kind of boggled my mind. He built the Steelers through the draft, drafting mainly from the small African-American players from those small colleges that nobody was looking into. Chuck Noll never lost a Super Bowl. Every Super Bowl, if you got there with Chuck Noll, you were winning it. The 1974 draft is probably like one of the greatest achievements of all time. Him and it wasn't Dan, it was Dan's brother. They absolutely hit it out of the park. There's 3 Hall of Famers in one draft. Is just, I don't know if that'll ever happen again. He adjusted to the passing rule. The passing rule changes in 1978. I think we went over that in one of our other podcasts where Don Shula tried to kind of, stick it to him, but Tony Dungy was that. He also famously yelled at Jerry Glanville after a game. So there's a link to that. Actually, we have that. Let me play that. Sorry about that. So, nice. Chuck Noll just could be, he could stand up for his team when he needed to, especially with good old Jerry Glanville causing trouble. But that's just like, legendary right there. He got sued by Al Davis over the criminal element comment. And I think that's just a positive because that's just great. He won 4 Super Bowls, 7 AFC championship games, 7 AFC Central titles in the 1970s. And he wasn't coach of the year until 1989. So I'm not sure why he wasn't, but that's kind of what happened. He has 209 wins, 156 losses, and one tie. Don Shula is the all-time leader with 328. He was elected, of course, in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1993, and he's definitely before my time. I never really watched him coach, so I don't have any, like, everything I know about him is secondhand or stuff I've read. So, I mean, and Tim, you were pretty young. I mean, you saw him coach, but I mean, you were kind of young when it was all going down.
Well, I think what I remember is, he was this legendary coach. And by the time I was a Steeler fan in the mid to late 80s, he was this guy that was super conservative. He was, if you looked around the league at that time, you had offenses like the one in Miami with Dan Marino throwing for 5,000 yards. You had the Denver offense with Elway. You had the Buffalo offense, the no huddle offense. You had the run and shoot in a couple places. I mean, you had a lot of dynamic kind of offenses in that era, and the Steelers were just old school, halfback, fullback, run the ball almost every time on first and second down. Chuck Noll's big trick play was they used to run a reverse, and it was like, I know it was Dwight Stone in the late 80s. In the earlier part of the decade, it might have been like Calvin Sweeney or Weegie Thompson or one of those guys. But that was their big trick play, was a reverse. Like, you hand off to the running back hands off to the receiver who's coming for an end around. And that was it. Like, they didn't do anything fancy. They didn't do fake field goals. They didn't, not that that's common today, but it just wasn't an innovative offense, and it was boring to watch, and they lost a lot of games. So that's kind of what I remember about Chuck. I mean, obviously, the whole decade before, he had great success, but it just felt like if he would have retired in like 1983 or something, I think, he would have just had a lot more of a legendary status for, just total success his whole career. He might have just stayed around a few years too long.
Fair enough. He had a lot of assistant coaches go on. I meant to mention that go on to become head coaches, including Tony Dungy, John Fox, and Joe Walton. Joe Walton didn't have much success here, but he did create the Robert Morris football college team. So, but we're kind of set Chuck Noll aside there, and now we'll move on to Bill Cowher's kind of credentials. And Bill Cowher is from Pittsburgh. He grew up in Crafton. He went to NC State. He played for Philadelphia and Cleveland on special teams. And he actually coached for Marty Schottenheimer in Kansas City and Cleveland. Then when Chuck Noll retired that would have been 91, right? Yes, 91. He was hired over Dave Wannstedt. They were actually interviewing him and Dave Wannstedt. And I think there was a couple other people, but I think those were the two lead kind of guys. Bill Cowher has a 161 and 99 and one tie overall record. Hey, that's that game against Atlanta. I know the tie. I can remember that game. He has one Super Bowl win. That was Super Bowl 40. He has 2 wins and 4 losses in the AFC Championship game. And he was only the second coach behind Paul Brown to take his team to the playoffs in the first 6 years of coaching. His coaching style, he was definitely a player's coach. He was very dramatic on the sideline, getting people fired up, yelling and screaming and just stomping around. He liked trick plays, Tim was just talking about trick plays and how Chuck Noll did not like trick plays. Well, Bill Cowher loves trick plays, and he liked it so much he ran one in the Super Bowl 40 that actually locked it up on the wide receiver pass. He put Cordell Stewart in that slash roll. I would say that's something he probably had in common, and maybe this is unfair of me. He was conservative in the second half of games. And also, I always felt he favored his veteran players, especially later in his career. Like the whole Joey Porter over James Harrison, when I thought Harrison was a little better the last year or two, but Joey Porter wasn't bad. I just thought Harrison was just better, and they just didn't. But I'm not a coach, so Moving on to the media and fan reaction. Bill Cowher, like once again, there isn't like a lot of like letters to the editor or anything. Although the Steelers were pretty, famous, but once again, 1991, there wasn't an internet. Maybe somebody made some comments on the Prodigy message board or something, on dial-up, but I couldn't access those. So, uh, Cowher, right from the get, but I did see his press conference. He sets the goal to win a Super Bowl that year. He said, "We're going to win the Super Bowl. Our goal is to win the Super Bowl every year, and our goal is to put a fifth trophy in the case outside the hall." And so fans seem to really respond to that. They really like that kind of gusto, I guess. And but then later, as things went on, the fans kind of turned on Cowher when he didn't win a Super Bowl in those early years, and of course that turned to all the ridiculous rumors that were spread about him and Bill Cowher, like filling up his gas tank at night after losses and just all kinds of stuff like that. Um, On to the negative about Bill Cowher. He had a poor playoff record, especially in the AFC Championship game. I mean, they really probably should have beat San Diego in '94, and losing to that Patriots team after Brady got hurt. Like if Brady would have been healthy, I think I wouldn't fault them as much for that 2001 game. But like to Bledsoe, really, they should have won that championship game. I don't think they beat the Rams or the 49ers in those Super Bowls, but they should have at least gotten there. He did lose Super Bowl 30 because Neil O'Donnell just decided to throw to Larry Brown or for whatever reason. I said I thought he was too conservative sometimes. He took the criticism too personally. You have to kind of have a really thick skin to be an NFL head coach, to be anybody in public anymore, because it's tough. People are really mean. He could get tears with the media, as Bill would say. Bill terse. He would say that's a terse. I think it's pronounced terse, but he did finally, he got it when he got his Super Bowl win. He couldn't follow it up with another successful season. It was almost like, I think it almost was like a lifetime achievement award. It was like, okay, I did it. I'm done. And he had trouble drafting and developing quarterbacks. He only really had Ben Roethlisberger, and he only drafted Ben because Dan Rooney made him. He wanted to draft Sean Andrews, the offensive lineman. So, on to the positive. I always love this one. He shoved a picture in the pocket of an official when the Steelers got called for 12 men on the field when it didn't happen. That was before instant replay, and they had the little like the paper printouts. If anybody remembers anything, he ran over and stuffed it in the guy's pocket. It was funny. He traded for Jerome Bettis, which is probably one of the best trades in Steeler history. He was very passionate. He took a 7-19 the year before and got them to an 11-5 record. Chuck Noll's last record was 7-9, and he took pretty much that exact same team and got them to an 11-5 record. So he also had a 108 1-1 record when leading 11 points or more. The tie, of course, was that Atlanta game. So, I mean, maybe I'm too hard on him for being conservative in the second half, but it always seemed like those second halves were way closer than they ever should have been. He drafted well. Like Alan Faneca, Troy Polamalu, Levon Kirkland, which of course was like, that's always like one of those stories where it's like, oh, didn't like they took the guy that he wanted and he just like pointed to Levon Kirkland, and it ended up being like a great pick. He also like did really well finding players that went undrafted, like Willie Parker and James Harrison. And he had one of the most successful playoff runs of all time. They beat the first, second, and third seed, and then the number one seed from the NFC. So that was the infamous, Bengals, Colts, Denver, Seattle Super Bowl run of Super Bowl 40. He ranks 20th in coaching wins in the regular season, ahead of Pete Carroll and behind Joe Gibbs. And many of his coaching staff went on to be head coaches. Bruce Arians, Don Capers, David Culley, who's currently the coach of the Texans, Chan Gailey, Jim Haslett, Dick LeBeau, Marvin Lewis, Mike Mularkey, and Ken Whisenhunt. So he's had a lot of people go on to be head coaches. And anything else to add to the Mike Tomlin or not Mike, the Bill Cowher profile there?
So I'll always remember Cowher's first game. They were playing in Houston, and the Oilers used to often beat us in Houston back then. And they Oilers were up 14-0, and it was like, okay, we're just not going to be very good this year. And I was in the other room, and I remember my dad and my brother were like, come quick, the Steelers just did a fake punt. And I'm like, a what now? Like, I didn't even know that was possible to do a fake punt because I'd watched Chuck Noll for the last 10 years, right? Like, and so they actually ended up coming back and winning that game. And then him like screaming on the sidelines and the spit coming out of his mouth and everything. Like it was definitely like a sensation those first few years. People just loved him. He was so different than Noel. But kind of to your point, Steve, as time wore on, uh, I don't want to say he was similar to Noel, but the conservative kind of side. You talked about Schottenheimer. He was so similar to Schottenheimer, and he and Schottenheimer both were infamous for getting their teams to really big games and then losing to teams that maybe weren't as good as them. And Cowher did that several times, and like you mentioned those two championship games especially that they probably should have won. And I think the other negative about Cowher was just that what you said about not drafting it. Like he tried so long to just win with game manager, quarterback, and a solid defense and a good running game. They always had that. All those years they had a great defense, and they had Bettis or Bam Morris or Barry Foster, whoever is a running back, and then they usually had a quarterback. I mean, sans like the year that we had like Kent Graham, but they usually had a quarterback that could do good enough. But then if you got down 10 points in a playoff game, like we did against Denver the one year, it was like you just didn't have a guy that could lead you back, like when you had Ben or when you had Terry Bradshaw. So I don't know. That all being said, he was a great coach. I mean, and I was so happy. I mean, obviously, I was so happy they won the Super Bowl because we're Steelers fans and we waited our whole lives for that. But I was happy for him. And my favorite Cowher moment was his daughters coming onto the field and him seeing his daughters, because there's a really famous clip of him with, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Megan, I can't remember which daughter it was, but he's like trying to hold back tears after they lost to the Cowboys. And she's, maybe like 10 years old at the time. And then 10 years later, she's like an adult and they're all screaming and crying together. So that was pretty cool. I mean, I loved Cowher. I really did. And there were some negatives, but he was a great coach.
It's hard to argue with his regular season success. Playoffs, definitely, but it's tough to win a Super Bowl, and I think it's tough to win a Super Bowl without like a really good quarterback. Like you might sneak and win one like Tampa Bay did, but if you don't have like that Hall of Fame, it's tough to do. But we'll set Bill kind of with Chuck Noll, and we'll move on to the last person we're introducing here. That would be the current coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That would be one Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin's background, he grew up in Newport News, Virginia. He went to William and Mary, which that's an Ivy League school, I do believe. So Mike Tomlin's smart. He was hired by Tony Dungy in 2001 to be a defensive backs coach, and he was on John Gruden's staff in Tampa Bay when they won the Super Bowl. He actually ended up being a defensive coordinator for the Vikings for 1 year in 2006. So he had really only been a defensive coordinator for 1 year, and he had been a head coach for, not a head coach, but like an assistant coach that just kind of bounced around. So he wasn't, I remember him getting some hype, but he wasn't like definitely on people's radar. He was hired as Steelers head coach in 2007, and he was surprisingly hired over Russ Grimm and Ken Wisenhunt, which I think Russ Grimm thought he had the job. So it was kind of surprising. He's he's one of the youngest coaches to make and win a Super Bowl. Mike Tomlin's coaching style, I would call him aggressive, because I remember he would go for two like a lot, and like he liked to go for it on fourth down, like very, very hyper aggressive. I don't know if they run as many trick plays as Bill Cowher, but he's definitely like aggressive. Although I don't know, the last recently, then people are kind of saying he's not, but I don't know. I always thought he was aggressive. Players and coaches seem to really like playing for him, so I definitely call him a player's coach. He handles the media, I think, better than Cower or Knoll. He's almost like the best person I always thought with handling like the media was Bill Parcells. And he's very like Bill Parcells. Like he just always has like these great quotes that can just like in the media, like he gives the media something to say, but he doesn't say anything at the same time. So it's or he doesn't say anything that's not obvious. And it's not like abrasive like Bill Belichick, who's trying to do the same thing, but I just think Bill Belichick just doesn't want to be bothered. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. There's
So
not a lot of contempt from Tomlin. Like Belichick, it's all
yeah.
contempt. Like he gives a short answer,
Yeah.
and it's like he's almost like daring you to ask a follow up because like you're such an idiot. I dare you to ask another question. And Tomlin just kind of gives those like Tomlinisms, which can be a little frustrating because it's like just talk like a normal person, dude. But like you said, it gives an answer, it's polite, and it doesn't really, he doesn't ramble on or say anything that's gonna people are gonna point to and be like, oh, coach said this. He's very good about just giving controlled, simple answers.
Yeah, no, yeah, he's very good at that. And like he'll say, like I think after one of the games I think they lost just recently to Green Bay. He just said, we got to play better. But he said it in such a way it's just like we'll be judged on how well we play future in the season or something. And it was just like he basically said, "Oh, we got to play better," without saying it that way. So he's very good at press conferences. I will say
I
that.
used to I used to steal his
Um,
stuff for my job. Like we were talking about some project that didn't go so well, and I was just like, we don't look in the rearview mirror. Like it just like he says just some of his like sayings and stuff. I used to love to just use his sayings because they were just so I don't know, unique, you know.
the standard is the standard. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't
The
really
standard
say
is the
anything.
standard. Yep.
I mean,
Yeah,
because
it
what he means
doesn't.
is we're holding ourselves to a high standard. I mean, the follow up question is, well, what is the standard? Those, what is your standard? What standard are you holding yourself to? But
Well, that's usually when somebody gets hurt. So you have,
yeah,
I don't know, like back in the day, like Le'Veon Bell is out for the season, and now somebody else has to come in, and you know, well, he's not going to be as good as Le'Veon Bell. Well, the standard is a standard. Just keep
yeah.
moving forward, and we expect them to play just as well. So that was kind of that where that phrase used to always be used. Like we're not going to make excuses for guys getting hurt.
Well, that's the he does, yeah, because he doesn't try to make excuses, and that's probably more for his players than anything else. But yeah, it's an interesting way of doing things. Media and fan reaction; these are fun. My thanks to Tim for sending them over from the old blog. Was this from the Post Gazette Blog and Gold website? So now we're into 2007. The internet is in full effect, and we can go on there and slander people that we really don't know. So, um, what is this? Tomlin, the beginning of an era, the destruction of a franchise. I guess somebody said that. Almost as big as a mistake as cutting Johnny Unitas or not drafting Dan Marino. The Rooneys blew it in their frantic desire to adhere to the Rooney rule. Well, Super Bowls are out of the question. All Steeler stuff in the garbage. Not wasting my time following this waste of time. Ruin a good team because you are too cheap to pay. Okay. Uh,
I think part of this was so I think there's a couple factors here that a lot of people were upset when they made that hire. One was that what you said before, they had Russ Grimm and Ken Wisenhunt already on staff. I think Grimm was like the assistant head coach under Cowher, and Wisenhunt was the offensive coordinator, and they had won a Super Bowl 2 years earlier. Uh, Grimm especially was like very, he was an offensive lineman, a Hall of Fame offensive lineman for the Redskins, and he was very like big mustache, bring your lunch pal to work, kind of blue collar guy, right? The guy that Pittsburghers love. Two, I think, was the fact that Tomlin didn't have much experience. Like you said, he was at 1 year of a defensive coordinator. And I think a lot of people, even though the Steelers were 8-8 at the time, like everybody always forgets, they had a pretty bad season before he got hired. But I think a lot of people at the time were like, well, we just won a Super Bowl 18 months ago or whatever. So what are you doing hiring like a guy with no experience? And then I think three, and I hesitate to say this because I think that in our culture today, we tend to blame everything on racism. And I think there's some things that are legit and some things that aren't. And I think we just overuse the anything negative happens to a person of color. And it must be that everybody's a racist, and it's not always the case. But man, I just have to think that some people, at least there was some portion of the population in this case, that just weren't happy that we hired a black coach, and that are still not happy today that we have a black coach.
Wow, I've heard that argument before, but I mean, I'm going to criticize Mike Tomlin, and I mean, I just stick to the facts. I'm not going to, I don't think it really matters what his appearance is.
I think there's a difference between criticizing.
Did you win a?
Well, there's a difference between criticizing him and like all Steelers stuff in the garbage, like that comment you read, or people
that was ridiculous. Yeah,
want him fired every time we lose a game. Now, granted, there were people that wanted Cowher fired every time we lost a game too. So again, this is a percentage, and it could be 1%, it could be higher. I'm just saying, I just can't help but think there's some percentage, however minuscule or large that is, that just maybe would react differently if we were a white coach. And I have no data to back that up.
We can
perception.
Well, do we want to hear from the immortal Terry Bradshaw? Who doesn't? Tim, I have a clip of this. Would you like me to play the clip, or would you rather me just read it? Do we want to have Terry
play the
for
clip
himself?
Yeah, play the clip.
Terry, I think Mike Tomlin still needs to prove he's a great coach.
Oh, I don't think he's a great coach at all. He's a nice coach, and to me, I've said this. I've said he's really a great cheerleader guy. I don't know what he does, but I don't think that he's a great coach at all. His name never even pops in my mind when we think about great coaches in the NFL.
Now, the
Chris,
coach, the coach before him, Bill Cowher, did you think Bill was a great coach?
I think Bill came in. Yeah, I think Bill was. I think Bill came in and took over a team that had been struggling. And when you take over for Chuck, and even the Steelers had some good years, really good years, and then they kind of, by their standards, kind of mellowed out. And at Chuck's end of Chuck's career, in comes Cowher. Cowher kind of gave him that boost to get him back up and win a Super Bowl. So Cowher, I have more identity with Cowher than I do Tomlin. I know Cowher when he came over from Kansas City as a defensive coordinator, I believe, down there, yeah. And his teams were tough. Tomlin came in from Minnesota, and I didn't know anything about him. So maybe it's unfair for me to make the comparison.
I don't think it's unfair. I happen to agree with Terry.
Well, I wasn't done. I posed him a question, then I'm going to finish it. I believe Mike Tomlin is a very good football coach. Now, I believe that their defense hasn't played well under his tenure because they spent all the money on the offensive side. So I think that's had a major reflection on how the team has played.
Well, and it's funny, that was in 2016, which is a year that we made the AFC Championship game. So, I mean, Bradshaw, honestly, I don't, I mean, to me, I like Terry Bradshaw, but his opinions mean so little to me, because he flips back and forth on things 100 times. He flips back and forth on whether he likes Pittsburgh, doesn't like Pittsburgh, likes the fans, hates the fans. The whole thing with Chuck Noll, he's very almost schizophrenic in the way he talks about things. So whatever. I mean, that's a lame opinion. And he's sitting there like his reason for his whole logic for that seemed to be, I knew who Cowher was when the Steelers hired him, but I didn't know who Tomlin was. So what?
Well, I don't know what to make of Terry's comments there sometimes, or Terry Bradshaw's comments. I don't know, like, Here, I'll go with my negatives. Let me go with my negative. Like I've done negatives about every. We'll do Mike Tomlin's negatives, and these are, in my opinion, just like they were with Chuck Noll and Bill Cowher. And feel free to write angry letters to the editor or wherever. Respond on Twitter or yeah. So he was. I thought he's become. I think not at first. I think he's become too friendly with his players sometimes, and I think this is a reaction because I think the first year he came in, he correctly understood that he needed to come in and be like, tough guy Tomlin, like crack the whip on this veteran team, because he had a veteran team, like you said, that was 2 years separated from the Super Bowl. So he came in and he practiced them hard, was really strict, and he ran them down. But I think he had to do that to get, because like if he comes in there and he's buddy, they're not going to respect him. And I think he did that to kind of get their respect because he had never been a head coach before, So then after that, he kind of backed off and gave guys rest periods and stuff, so he doesn't wear down his veterans. And I think sometimes he's gone too far the other way, where like when they got that team that had Brown and Bell on it, I thought he should have cracked the whip more on that team and gone back to kind of his old way when he first came in. But that kind of gets into maybe a little different. We'll continue with the negative. I think he wasted an opportunity, like I just said, with Ben and Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger, all of them. He had those three, and they didn't even make the Super Bowl. Like that's as bad a wasted opportunity as Bill Cowher. They should have at least had one Super Bowl with that group. He almost tripped Jacoby Jones that one time when he was actually standing on the field. He actually got fined for that. He got a $100,000 fine for that. He's had mixed results in the draft. Tomlin's had some pretty good. They get a wide receiver. They can find wide receivers, but defensive backs, he can't translate the wide receiver to defensive back. But they've got a lot of great wide receivers. They've done really well. He was totally outcoached in a championship game by Bill Belichick, and I guess that was that 2016 season the year they went, and Bell, that was another time. Bell, like, oh, I can't play, I'm hurt. So Bell can't play. And then they play zone defense against Brady. I mean, maybe they didn't have the people that year, but it was just like, and that was that, who was that lacrosse player who like had like 10 catches and a bunch of touchdowns? Was that Hogan?
Oh, yeah.
Chris Hogan?
Yeah, he killed us in that game.
And then they lost to Blake Bortles in Jacksonville in the playoff. Come on. That was another one. That was pretty bad. Those are the two games that really stick out to me with Tomlin. Enough of the negatives. Let's do the positives. He has 7 AFC North titles. He has 154 wins already, 87-1. What is the one tie? Did they tie Cleveland once or something?
It was the opening game of the season. It was at Cleveland. I want to say 2018, but don't quote me on that. It was, but I remember because our record was 0-1 when we played our second game.
He was smart enough at the beginning to keep Dick LeBeau on staff when he was hired. That was probably one of his better, moves. He's been in 2 Super Bowls, as many as Cowher. He's won 1 and lost 1. He's never had a losing season. The team does seem to play hard every week. Every week the team does seem to come and play. But once again, that postseason, that 8-8 postseason record, and the 8-8 season with Duck Hodges at quarterback, that was unbelievable. I don't know how that team won 8 wins with that guy. I mean, nothing against Duck Hodges. He's a nice guy, but he's just probably not an NFL quarterback. He traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick, him and Colbert. So pretty good things there. So Tomlin's definitely, I think more of him than Terry Bradshaw does. I think he's got to be one of the top 5, top 10 coaches in the league currently, right? I mean, so that's the background. So we got our Knowles, our Cowhers, and Tomlins. So here's the fun part.
Hold
How
on
do
a
we
second.
compare the 3?
Can I chime in on Tomlin some more?
Yeah, go for it. Oh,
So-
yeah. Go with Tomlin.
So yeah, well, first of all, I couldn't believe you didn't have the challenges in there for one of the negatives, because Mike Tomlin cannot win a
Oh,
challenge if his life
yeah.
depended on it. I don't know what that is,
I
but it's
think
like anytime the
I
red
don't
flag
even
comes out,
put
you're just
any.
like,
I don't put any stock in those challenges because it's just the rules are so ridiculous that there's just ever since the Jesse James catch, it's just like it is what it is at this point. You're just they're gonna do what it's either a badly written rule or a you know I don't know. It's kind of like one of those things where like they write rule, they try and fix something, and I've said this many times, they try and fix something that maybe isn't quite perfect, and then they make it worse. And that's kind of what they did with a lot of the rules. And I think that's what happens to Tomlin sometimes is he tries to challenge things, and it's just you can't catch a break with the rules. So I didn't really hold that against him.
I think too on the postseason record, it's easy to just look at record, and I think if you really dig into the context, so let's just compare with Cowher, because Noel, it's hard to compare postseasons because Noel had obviously a lot more success in the postseason than either of those two guys, but Noel's just spent a whole decade pretty much not getting to the postseason too. I think, the rub on Cowher for years was, oh my gosh, he always loses the AFC Championship game at home. He lost 4 AFC Championship games at home, and that was unbelievable. People just were beside themselves. Tomlin, the rub is he doesn't even get to the championship game except for, a couple of times. So what I try to look at is who should they have beat and who shouldn't they have beat. So Cowher lost 4 AFC Championship games at home. Well, one was to Elway and the Broncos in that year that they won the Super Bowl. So I don't know that we should have beat them even though we're playing at home. And 2 were to Brady, like you said, that first one was special teams blunders and Bledsoe. I think we should have won that one, but the second one, again, the Patriots were in their 3rd Super Bowl year, so you can't say that they absolutely should have won. Tomlin, some of his playoff losses, the Tebow game, a lot of people remember that, but as we talked about in our Denver episode, so many people were hurt in that game. It was a joke that we were even, in the game at that point. The Ravens in 2014, the Broncos in 2015, those were 2 other games where, that Ravens playoff game, we had to sign a running back off the street and start him. I mean, so there were definitely some games where the team just didn't have enough guys left. Oh, the Jacksonville game, his first season, was another one where we just didn't have enough guys. Right. Now, that being said, the Blake Bortles game you mentioned, the Cleveland game in 2020. I mean, there's some definite playoff games that they should have. They had the advantage and they should have won.
It bothers me that Patriots game, that championship game against the Patriots should have been much more competitive. You can't play zone against Tom Brady, and everybody knew that. And maybe they didn't have the people to do that. But I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
That's what drives me.
That's a fair point. That's like you. Maybe they shouldn't have won, but they shouldn't have been out of the game by the 3rd quarter, which is what happened. So that's fair. So yeah, it's I don't know, in context. And then I think the other point I want to make is you talked about how hard it is to win a Super Bowl. I think we get spoiled in Pittsburgh, but if you just look at peers, right? So let's take some of the other. Let's take Belichick out because nobody's Belichick's peer.
Well, here I do have a category there in my notes on the peers. Do you want me to run through them?
No, let's save that then. I will save that point for later.
Okay. Yeah, that's a comparison to the other people's. I would say Noel has the most Super Bowls. Cowher had the most impressive Super Bowl run. Tomlin has definitely had the most consistent regular season success, and he has a Super Bowl win. We're comparing kind of their wins, the regular season, historic wins. Like I would call that like historic wins. I think like Cowher's win is the one over the Colts in 2000 Super Bowl 40 run, and then I would say for Chuck Noll was the Super Bowls against the Cowboys, probably. Who built the team the best? I think Chuck Noll, hands down. He basically like started from scratch. I mean, and set everything up. Although it's tough to just because something's set up doesn't mean you can't screw it up and and not keep it going. And wins over contemporaries. We'll get back to like Tim's point he was making a couple minutes ago. I have Noel versus Don Shula, Tom Landry, John Madden, Bill Parcells, Joe Gibbs, Bill Walsh. And I think this kind of goes back to what you were saying, where Noel in the 70s, like he's definitely better than Don Shula and Tom Landry and John Madden. But then in the 80s, like I don't know, the guy, maybe the game just got away from him or he just couldn't keep up. Like Parcells, Gibbs, and Walsh are definitely had much more better coaching, I don't know, times at that time than Noel did. Cowher was tough. Like who was really Cowher's big like coaching contemporary? I put Jimmy Johnson, Bill Belichick, and Andy Reid. That's the only ones I could really come up with for Cowher. Like I couldn't think of anybody else. Like Dick Vermeil. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know who
Mike
else.
Mike Holmgren, or who was the Denver coach? I'm blanking on his
Oh,
name.
Shanahan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Shanahan. Right. You could have put those
Yeah.
guys in there. It was those windows were a little smaller for those two guys, but you could have put them, I guess, in there
Yeah.
potentially.
And of course Tomlin versus Belichick. Belichick's been around a while. Andy Reid again, and I put John Harbaugh because they're in the same division, and they're both pretty similar coaches. Probably I didn't look up John Harbaugh's record, but I bet they're pretty close. I mean, Harbaugh hasn't lost the Super Bowl, right? No. So, but you want to get back to your point about the contemporary? Who do you think?
Well, I think for the contemporaries, at least for Tomlin, and we could look at this for the other guys too. You made a point earlier; it's really hard to win a Super Bowl, and so again, Tomlin had these great teams with Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. Cowher had these great teams in the 90s with this stud defense and Hall of Fame players. And both of those guys only won one Super Bowl. Well, Sean Payton had Drew Brees for how many years? And Pete Carroll's had this great defense, and Russell Wilson, and Mike McCarthy had Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre. I mean, if you go on down the list, those guys I just named all won one Super Bowl. Andy Reid won Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
Just like Tomlin. So I don't know. Harbaugh won Super Bowl, and all those guys had, not necessarily Harbaugh, but the rest of those guys all had franchise quarterbacks, a stacked team, and they still only won one. So I just think it's harder to do than people think. And it's just, if and then you could say the same thing for Cowher, because again, if you look at the 90s, some of those guys we named, I mean, Shanahan won two, but Mike Holmgren with Brett Favre and that team only won one. George Seifert with Steve Young and whoever was after George Seifert, they only won one. So it's just hard. It's hard to do. So you can say that coaches didn't live up to expectations, but then you could also say that it's just who does, right? Other than Belichick and like Shola and Noel and those guys in the 70s, but that was such a different era. You didn't have, free agency, like you drafted a guy and he was on your team forever. So, I mean, if you look at Tomlin and Cowher, other than Belichick, I don't know that you can find too many coaches that you would have been like, man, I wish we would have had that guy instead.
Fair point. I just comes down. I think Tomlin, like it would be nice for him to win another Super Bowl. Like I would like to see him win one more, and I don't know. Like maybe I'm asking like one. That's all. Like why is one okay for Bill Cowher and not for Mike Tomlin? I don't know. Maybe I still feel like that first one that Tomlin won, he kind of won with like a lot of Cowher's players. So maybe that's kind of coming into it a little bit. But it would be definitely nice to see. Like I think Tomlin's a really good coach, and like I think he's top 5. Definitely. I mean, I don't know if I could name 5 better coaches than Mike Tomlin. And like you said, Sean Payton's. And then there's the young and up and coming coaches, like the guy in
Buffalo.
who's the guy who gets worship? Well,
Well, Sean-
him, but like there's the guy in
Sean
the
McVay.
Rams
Yeah,
guy.
Sean McVay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's also 0-1 in
So,
Super
I
Bowls.
mean,
So yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Tomlin and Cowher.
And hasn't exactly had a franchise quarterback either. Jared
Yeah.
Goff. I mean,
Fair.
yeah.
Fair. I mean, as of the time of this recording, we're recording this in 2021. At the end of this current season, Tomlin and Cowher will both have been the coach of the Steelers for 15 years. Tomlin, unless the Steelers really go into the tank here, is going to pass. He's going to finish the season with more wins than Cowher by a handful. And both will be 1-1 in Super Bowls at the 15-year mark. Now, Cowher retired after the 15-year mark. I think Tomlin, to your point, Steve, it's going to be very interesting what happens from here because you're going to lose your franchise quarterback to retirement that Tomlin had this entire time. And can he rebuild? Can he restack? Can he get back to that Super Bowl? Can he even still field a competitive team going forward? I think his legacy is still to be written. And I think it does, for Cowher, it was like years and years of disappointment. And then at the very end, he finally won, and that kind of erased a lot of things, which helps.
Yeah.
I mean, John Elway, look at John Elway. He lost 3 Super Bowls. He was just a guy that always lost the big game, and then he wins 1 at the end and 2 at the end, and then it just, none of it matters, but if John Elway wins a Super Bowl in 1984 and then loses all the big games after that, maybe his legacy is different, right? So I don't know, but all I know is that those 2 guys are both at 15 seasons, and Cowher, and I don't think Tomlin's going anywhere anytime soon. So I think if we did this show in 5 or 10 years, I think then you're really going to be able to differentiate those 2 guys at least.
Well, history is always being written, so a little more historical comparison. And another fun fact is Norv Turner has 144 wins. So, and I think I don't know if that's more than Tomlin. Is that more than Tomlin? No.
Norv Turner
has 144 wins. That's unreal. But Buddy Parker, who I said I would mention, he has 104 wins overall. So, but he only has 51 with the Steelers. So outside of like these 3, like the Steelers really didn't have much anything in the way of success and or coaching. Bill Belichick, like you said, like what if Bill Belichick, like after like being defensive coordinator of the Jets or something, just decides, that's it. I'm just going to be defensive coordinator and not a head coach again. I mean, what's his legacy? Like, oh, wow, he kind of coached in Cleveland for a little bit, or he retires after the Spygate stuff. So, but I mean, historically, when you compare these 3 coaches, Belichick obviously has 6 Super Bowl wins. He has 282 wins. He's 3rd all time now. Don Shula has 2 Super Bowl wins and the only undefeated season. And Don Shula is still the all-time coaching wins leader at 328. So Belichick has like a long way to go. That's 100 wins. That's quite a ways to go to catch up to Shula.
Let's talk about Shula because Shula, you could compare Shula to Tomlin because very similar trajectory. Shula won those 2 Super Bowls in 72 and 73. I mean, that was his first. He was the coach of the Colts in 68. So, I mean, that was his first couple of years in Miami. And then he had a ton of success. The Dolphins were in the playoffs a ton in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But then he never won another Super Bowl after that. So, he spent the last literally 20 plus years of his career not winning a Super Bowl. And that might be Tomlin.
He could be the new Don Shula. I hope not. I'd like to see him win another one. I mean, just because I'm a Steeler fan. I like Mike Tomlin. I think he's a very good coach. I guess it keeps coming back. It's tough to win a Super Bowl. Like Andy Reid, he only has 1. He's 6th all time in wins. Bill Walsh has 3 Super Bowls. I didn't look up his wins. The 2nd all time is Papa Bear, George Halas. He has 6 NFL championships. And Curly Lambeau has 6 NFL championships too.
Whatever. There were like 4 teams back then.
Well, you know how many championships Vince Lombardi has? He has 5. So, and that's 3 NFL and 2 Super Bowls. So, right. So you're not too big on Curly Lambeau or George Halas, but But even Lombardi has 5, so I guess that's one more than Knoll. But gets kind of into the comparison, like, how do you compare NFL championships with Super Bowls?
It's so hard to compare.
Take that with a grain of salt.
Lombardi, 3 of those before they started playing the Super Bowl, there were something like 13 NFL teams, and then they merged with the AFL, and that's what created kind of the modern NFL. That's why so much of NFL history is post-merger. Anytime they cite records or stats, it's always post-merger, because that's really when the modern game started. I mean, not to take anything away from Lombardi or Hallis or Curly Lambeau. I think Hallis and those guys, their legacy is more that they kept the league running at a time where it wasn't what it is today, and you had to scratch and claw to have enough money to put on the next season. And if they never do that, then we don't have an NFL. So I think that's their more important legacy, personally. And I'm sure they were good coaches too. But again, it's impossible to compare, the 1929 Packers, who, played 3 teams that folded by week 4. It's just hard.
I'm not discounting the impact that Bronco Nagurski had. I think didn't he play for the Bears in one of their probably
He did.
So, I mean, Bronco Nagurski was just awesome, and George Hallis knew how to use him in his T formation. Isn't that their little Bears song? And the T formation, bear down, Chicago Bears.
I'll just take your.
We'll post that in. Yeah, we'll post that in the link somewhere. The Chicago Bears fight song. But I all in all, like, I don't know if you could go wrong with either of these 3 guys. Which one is the best out of all the 3? Which one would you prefer? It's like picking between your kids here, but I don't know. I guess.
It's another hard comparison, because Knoll was
probably built it from the ground up. He literally started.
He did, but at a time that things were so different, right? And would he be able to do that today? And then Cowher, I mean, he came in. It was such a refreshing change when he came in. Tomlin's just kind of like slow and steady wins the race kind of a guy. You're right. I think it's really hard to, like, if you had to start a team. If you had an expansion team today and you could take one of these 3 guys in your prime, who would you take? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Let's say, all right, we both, for some reason, we luck out and win the Powerball, and you'd buy the Detroit Lions and from the Fords, and I'll buy the Jacksonville Jaguars because I want to go be warm. You can go hang out in Detroit. I'll go to Jacksonville and hang out with Shad Khan and own the team and play my games in London too much. So I own the Jacksonville Jaguars. You own the Detroit Lions. You can hire, 2 out of the 3, one of these coaches of these 3. Who are you hiring? Because I know who I'm taking, probably. I'm taking.
Now, and we're getting them in their in their
prime. He knows, they know how to do it. They're willing to deal with free agency. We'll keep it in context. Maybe they're not willing to deal with free agency. So I don't know. I would go with Chuck Knoll because I think he knows how to build a franchise. And I think with that's probably the instead of culture. Although Tomlin is a close second, but I think I trust Knoll more. But that's just me.
I mean, I can't argue with that. It's
the Detroit Lions are going to pick Chuck Knoll too, or are they going to enter 4 Super Bowls in the next 10 years?
Well, and the competition that Knoll had in the 70s. I mean, the Cowher and Tomlin both lost to Belichick and Brady in championship games, but the Dolphins and the Raiders and the Cowboys. I mean, there were these great dynasty teams in the 70s, and the Steelers trumped all of them. And so, I don't know. If you're just going off of track record and who you think can build from the ground up, I can't argue the Knoll selection.
So would you go with them, though, to start a team, or would you go with somebody else?
I'd probably take my shot on Knoll.
Not on Tomlin, really. See, I think Tomlin would be, I don't know, like, if Cowher could build a team because he kind of, but so did Tom. I don't know. I think Tomlin would be really good at setting a culture. And I really like that about Mike Tomlin. Like, obviously you can't pick Chuck Knoll. He's no longer alive, but definitely Tomlin would be like 1B. Like I would pick Tomlin over Cowher because I could see Tomlin coming in and creating a culture. And if I could get a good front office, like Colbert kind of people to go along with him, I think at very least you're going to make the playoffs every year, you know? So, but
I'd probably pick Tomlin over Cowher too, just because I think that I saw enough of the game manager, good running game, good defense to know that it's the Marty Schottenheimer, the Marty ball. Like I think that was always Cowher's first, go to. And like you said, he didn't even really want to draft Ben. And I don't know that can, especially today, I don't think that can win anymore. I mean, like you said, there's exceptions.
yeah.
For sure. Like Tampa Bay when they had, Brad Johnson and all that. But boy, it's a quarterback's league now. So I just, now granted, again, it's easy to say that for Tomlin because he already had Ben. So can Tomlin replace Ben? I think, again, it would be interesting to have this conversation in 5 or 10 years.
Maybe we'll revisit it then. But
there you go.
Well, yeah. Thanks, Tim, for another great podcast. Sarah, follow us on Twitter at Pittsburgh Sports Memories. Our website is, Tim, as follows.
PittsburghSportsMemories.weebly.com.
Okay, and if you want to, tell me how I was wrong, how really Buddy Parker is really the greatest Steelers head coach of all time, feel free to chime in. But thank you for listening. We enjoy it, and make sure you give us a rating so more people can hear great content like we deliver. Thank you, and we'll catch you next time.